Positionality and qualitative research. What are the 5 most important questions I receive and commonly asked questions with regards to positionality and qualitative research? The first one is definitely, what is positionality? How much information should I reveal about my positionality? What's the impact of positionality on my research? How do I overcome it? And where should I include the information in my report? I'm giving a bonus 6th question. Does it apply in quantitative research? So let's start with the first one. What is positionality? As humans, we are all biased in our own way. Our understanding and our perspective about things is always shaped by our experiences. And hence, as qualitative researchers, when we approach a particular topic, there's a lot with regards to our background and the position from which we are coming from that has an impact on how we approach the research question, how we plan our research process, and the data we collect and the way we interpret it. So positionality is the process of examining and acknowledging my positionality as I approach this research. So what in my background has an impact on the way I'm approaching this research? For example, I'm somebody who comes from the Middle East, so that in particular has an impact on how I perceive things if I'm going to conduct a research with minority groups in Canada, for example. If I'm conducting my research in another context, things might be different, but the background from which I'm coming has a major impact. And this does not only limit to where I'm coming from. For example, reflections about my own positionality that impact how I see things when I'm conducting research. I come from a Middle Eastern background. I grew up in a war-torn Lebanon, so I have the experience of going through civil war. I learned I'm more on the quantitative side, being somebody who studied biology. I was more oriented towards science originally. I picked up with education later on. My experience as a teacher first and then PhD holder helped shape my experience with regards to teacher preparation. My experience with the PhD in educational technology was originally shaped by my use of technology integration at one point in my life in the classroom. So all these shaped me. Now, the next question, how much information should I reveal? All the story that I gave you, should I reveal this every time I'm going to conduct a qualitative research? Not necessarily. There are certain things that we need to keep in mind. First off, there's the issue of privacy versus transparency. There's a trade-off. I want to be transparent, but I also have to keep my privacy respected. Everything I shared previously, as an example in the research question, does not impact my privacy. I'm fine with reflecting on this. Somebody else might not be comfortable reflecting that they grew up in a war-torn country during their younger years. Maybe they get triggered with it, they don't want to talk about it. It depends. There are certain things that I might have gone through which I know for sure impacted my experience or the way I'm going to approach a particular research question and process, but I'm not comfortable revealing. So I need to be transparent while not revealing my privacy. I do not have to reveal everything about my profile. What we need to do is work on sufficient but not excessive. I provide information that is helpful but not overdo it. Another thing that is extremely important is I just need to highlight some of the aspects that are context specific. So for example, if I'm conducting research on science education, I might not have to mention anything about my previous years and experience in the Middle East where I grew in a civil war. this doesn't help or add, it doesn't impact my teaching experience. Unless I'm talking about science teaching with refugees, for example. If that's the focus of my research, I can bring that reflection in. So make sure that you reflect on the aspects that relate to the topic that you're working on and things that might impact your perception about this context. You don't have to reveal your life history, but you need to be transparent with some of your positions and some of the things or experiences that impacted where that will impact how you approach the research. You can make use of generalizations. So rather than giving specific experiences that you went through, you can simply say that I come from a context where I have been involved with individuals, or I'm close to individuals who went through a civil war. You can have it more general. You don't need to be revealing and identify that it happened with you, especially in sensitive topics. If you're talking about trauma, if you're talking about stereotyping, if you're talking about racism, sometimes you might not be comfortable revealing particular aspects. Mental well-being, you don't have to reveal everything, but at least highlight whether you have experience through your community or your environment and network. Do you know something about it, and how will that impact? Or are you a total newcomer to the topic, but you're quite interested in it because you see that from what you're observing, it is having a major impact on, let's say, the educational context, for example. Be reflective rather than descriptive. You don't always have to describe the experience that you went through. You can be reflective and say, my experience puts me in a position where I understand more individuals who are coming from minority groups, so on and so forth. And lastly, consider the audience and the purpose of why you are revealing. If you are conducting a dissertation and the audience is the scope of your work and the audience is your professors and hopefully later on the bigger community, you might have to explain more and not necessarily reveal, but reflect more in depth. If you are preparing a short scope project for a course or a couple of courses, you might not have the space and scope to reveal a lot. If you are preparing for a publication, the word limit will not allow you to go for much, but you need to be transparent and reflect on how your positionality sets you with regards to this project. Third question, impact of positionality. Why is it important? Why do I have to do this and reveal certain aspects? The idea is that the position with which we come from, or our experiences and the perception or position we're coming from, will actually impact my research perspective. And this is of importance and relevance, and it plays an impact starting from the research question all the way to how you conduct the process and collect data and analyze it. So for example, if I am a science teacher and I went through science anxiety as I was growing up, perceptions about science anxiety in STEM education will be totally different than conducting a research where I was always doing well in my science studies and I never was anxious about science. I'm an outsider, I'm not an insider. So the perception of how I will perceive it will have a major impact. If I'm talking about science education with females versus science anxiety with females and science anxiety with males, as a female, I understand it more than a male who is conducting this research. So your position and how much you know about the topic, it starts with motivating you to study it. So that's why it's important to actually mention and reflect on that. The next thing, it impacts your literature review, your selection of articles. It impacts your selection of participants. It impacts how you prepare your research questions, how you conduct your interview, and what type of information you take and the way you analyze it. Because of this, because the level of bias can be so high, we need to get involved in reflective practice where we start off from the beginning, reflecting about what's my position, how am I approaching this, how is it impacting, so that I can critically reflect on what's the impact and how I can overcome it. So as I'm writing my positionality in the report, I need to highlight how is this background, what in my profile might impact, or how does my profile impact the process and how I do the research. And the biggest importance is I need to know this because I need to counterbalance it by trying my best not to be fully biased, so that the reader can better understand what did I do in order to minimize my bias, so that I'm not coloring the whole research based on my own bias. So how do we overcome the challenge of positionality? This is the second question. First off, we start off with the literature review. We try our best to be as balanced in our literature review as possible. We're not expected to conduct a systematic review of everything that's out there. However, if I'm coming with the positionality that I feel females have higher science anxiety or whatnot, I'm just giving these as an example, not trying to stereotype, but just if that's the position somebody's coming from, I cannot only focus in my literature review on research that indicates that females are purely the ones who have science anxiety. There's so much out there. I need to be balanced. If this is what drove me to come into this topic, I cannot make it the reason behind also focusing on that small lengths only, because I'll be coloring it inappropriately and in an unbalanced fashion. So make sure that your literature review, first off, literature review, try to be as balanced as possible. Use proper citation practices to bring voices from minority individuals. Do not focus only on the highly cited, but also check who are you citing. Are you citing minority group researchers? Are you checking aspects that relate to both sides of the aisle or the argument? Try to be balanced with that. That's number one. Number two, and it is extremely important, you have to practice self-reflection from moment one. You have to highlight, and this I mentioned earlier, you have to talk about where does this bias impact, so that you can, as you are going through the whole process, you stop and reflect. How does this impact my methodology? How can I overcome that? So, for example, with regards to selecting your participants, you cannot only focus on individuals that you feel will give you what you want to hear. In creating and developing your interview questions and interview protocol, you might actually have to make use of and get informed by the literature review and by understanding the different perspectives that surround this topic, so that your questions are also balanced and not directed in a particular approach. Minimize your bias in asking the questions and leading your participants. You can check the video on preparing interview questions. So try your best to be balanced in the data collection. When you collect the data, you can have, especially with smaller projects, you can have peer debriefing or participant validation. Peer debriefing, for example, if you are conducting your research as part of a course, if you are getting feedback from your professor, which happens most of the time, my students prepare their interview questions, pass it by me, I give them feedback, so on and so forth. This is peer debriefing. So you can say that you conducted peer debriefing as you were preparing your interview questions. Participant validation. In the interview video, I noted that you can check that out. There's a lot with regards to member checks. After you complete the interview, you can actually meet or send the participant the main ideas you took out, just to double check, is this what they meant? Is there something you missed? By recording and transcribing, if you receive approval for that, you will actually be limiting the bias, because you won't be forgetting something because you don't like it. By recording and transcribing, you're making sure that you have a fuller idea and coverage of the content. Now, if you are conducting a larger scope project, you can use triangulation, which is important. For example, making use of the interviews along with document analysis and maybe surveys, if that's the situation. But having triangulation helps a lot in minimizing the bias. Cultural sensitivity training. Cultural sensitivity tends to be very important in such contexts, especially when there are sensitive topics. Especially when there are sensitive topics. If you are conducting a large scope project that is over, if it is your dissertation and it's a very sensitive thing, or if it is a research program that you're embarking on, recommendation is you can take cultural sensitivity training just to learn more how to approach it and enable the participants to respond and open up. For a small scope project, you don't have the time for training, but approaching the process with cultural sensitivity tends to be very important. And finally, for big projects, you can make use of collaborative research by having different researchers coming together, partnering on a particular project. Then that tends to be very helpful. All this story, where do I include it? That's question number 5. Where do I include it in my report? First off, it's important to keep in mind that positionality and how you're addressing it is an integral part of qualitative research reporting and the story that you are telling. So it starts from introduction, if you want, all the way till the analysis and findings. In the introduction, you might actually present something of an idea about where are you coming to this topic from, what in your background got you interested in this topic, maybe what in your background presents a positionality component that will impact how you perceive and conduct this research. You can present this and note that I'll be discussing it in further detail down the road. In the literature review, you can highlight that you've managed trying your best to have a balanced literature review, addressing research from both contexts and multiple contexts. You can refer to your citation practices. In the methodology section, that's where you talk about what from the previous suggestions about what you can do, what did you do to minimize and overcome challenges presented because of positionality. So in the methodology section, you can highlight what you did to counterbalance the bias. When it comes to the discussion, the findings, you can always reflect on how your positionality impacted your understanding and how you tried to overcome that. Most of the reflections will come later in the discussion and in implications and takeaways. Finally, you can definitely reflect on it in the limitations. If you are talking about your limitations, that's where the limitations of the study, that's where you can mention that, okay, I'm acknowledging throughout the report, I started off by acknowledging my positionality. I told you I reflected on how I made up for that, but still, there are certain aspects that come with the territory of having the experiences I've had, and hence individuals need to check out this with an open mind while taking my positionality into considerations. Finally, there's so much more that you can mention, and it all depends on whether you are conducting a large scope project. So for example, a dissertation, if it is a dissertation, some people actually or academics ask for an appendix where a full detailed reflexive journal is presented with regards to positionality, but that always depends on the scope with what you're working. For a small project, you start with it in the introduction, reflect on it in methodology, and note it throughout the analysis findings and conclusion. Last question, does it apply in quantitative research? And this is the bonus question. Realistically speaking, positionality applies in everything because we are a product of where we are coming from. So realistically speaking, my positionality will also impact my process when it comes to quantitative research. It also impacts the way I understand the findings and the data and analysis. However, because quantitative research is by nature more structured and less biased than qualitative research, it's not attended to as much. We don't talk about positionality within quantitative research as much as we talk about it within qualitative, because positionality and how we overcome it is a way to ensure that the reader understands the bias we're bringing into the qualitative research. The quantitative research, the methodology itself and how we are presenting sort of presents whether there's a bias or not, depending on the sample size, depending on how the study is conducted, so on and so forth. So keep in mind, it does apply, but it is not addressed as much in quantitative and as explicitly in quantitative research because of the nature of quantitative research, where we try to minimize the bias and be objective by nature of the study itself. I hope this is helpful. If you have any other questions, shoot me a message and I'll try my best to get back to you.